Evening. And depending on your home longitudes, of course, that might well be good afternoon or good morning. But I'm Ranjit Hoskote. I'm a critic and curator based in Bombay, India. And I'm also closely associated with Mathaf, the Museum of Modern Art in Doha. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all this evening to the international premiere of a short documentary, an award-winning documentary commissioned by the Qatar Foundation and created by the Film House, which renders homage to the life and work of one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, moving into the 21st, M.F. Husain. And it's also a tribute to a masterpiece that he created called Seeroo fi al-Arض. Now, words like genius and visionary are often used for great artists. We would prefer to go with descriptions such as polymath and provocateur, because he straddled disciplines and media. So he was polymathic, and he provoked through his art tremendous waves of response from different kinds of publics. So he certainly was somebody who used art as a means of expanding the imagination, the public imagination, the civic imagination. And it's this seminal figure who belonged to the first generation of post-colonial Indian artists, who began his career in the late 1940s and who lived right up to 2011. His life spanned nearly a century, and his body of work extends across media, from painting to printmaking to architecture to cinema. And he drew his inspiration from the great continuing human adventure. And it's really in the spirit of his work that his last work is posthumous. It continues to speak for him in the afterlife, and it stands now in the precinct of the Qatar Foundation. It's open to the world. That work is Seeroo fi al-Arض, perhaps marking the apex of this artist's creative vision. It was commissioned under the patronage of Her Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser, chairperson of the Qatar Foundation, and it has been brought to fruition according to Husain's original design. So we are gathered here this evening on the 10th anniversary of Maqbool Fida Husain's passing to explore together what Seeroo fi al-Arض means to those who love art, to citizens at large, to Qatar, to India, to the world. And we will think together, reflect really on Husain and his legacy. And to do this, we are joined this evening by a marvelous lineup of speakers, each of whom brings her or his own connection to Husain and his art into play. And we'll soon be going into that part of the evening, into the conversation, a panel that's hosted by the Qatar Foundation in partnership with Scail magazine. Scail, as many of you know, is an online art, architecture, and design magazine based in Qatar. Its readership is enthusiastic about design and about architecture and about art. And also, just to let you know that whilst we are going to be speaking in English, there is live simultaneous translation available in Arabic and in Urdu and in Hindi, and I'll point you towards that in a bit. But first, I think we should sit back, and I would invite you all to enjoy the international premiere of the Seeroo fi al-Arض documentary. And it'll draw us really into the creative universe of M.F. Husain. I'd invite us all now to view the documentary. It's going to be screened now.
M.F. Husain was born in Pandapur, India in September of 1915 and died on the 9th of June 2011. In between that time, he completed over 40,000 paintings, became arguably the most important artist in the history of modern India, and sent shockwaves through the art world that can be felt to this day. And he did all that while barefoot, or at least most of the time, but we'll get to that later. His final artwork was unveiled in December of 2019, 8 years after his death. It is his one and only installation. But before we can grasp why this piece is so significant to his body of work, we need to understand who he was.
He started when he was 10, he did his first class painting, and it was perfect calligraphy. Arabic calligraphy, as you know, lends itself so beautifully to any art form. So that's what he did first, and then I think everything that he saw, he turned into a piece of art. Whether it was his uncle's books, he just took everything, and people got annoyed with him, but walls, anything that he could lay his hands on, he created and made it into a work.
He was so passionate about painting. Like from the childhood, he used to sketch about 100 sketches per day. He said to get perfection, you have to do at minimum 100 sketches.
It is something that you're born with. We in India believe in many multiple lifetimes, and I think whatever he had already finished in his previous lifetimes, he needed to carry on now. So he came with, I think, a lot. He obviously has lived a lot of lives.
He had his own ideas. He never followed a particular style of painting. He evolved and he got his own style. The passion was to create something different from nothing.
Hussein would then develop his skills by painting Bollywood billboards, which is maybe how he fell in love with cinema in the first place. But once again, we'll get to that later. 1947 brought the partition of India, and with it, an opportunity for artists like M.F. Husain to be at the forefront of creating the country's new artistic identity.
He was the first of the Indian artists who took the name overseas. So if you talk to anyone in any country, they will know Hussein. It's not like he belongs to India, he belongs to the world. At one point, he even belonged to Qatar.
يسمونه في الهند بيكاسو الهند. هو فاجأني إنه هو ياخذ اللون بإيده وبصوابعه. يعني أنا هني عملت رابط ما بين الأكشن تبع إيده وهو ماسك اللون ويشتغل على الكانفاس وهو يمشي حافي. يعني علاقته مع الأرض مباشرة وعلاقته مع اللون والحس على القماش مباشرة.
There's a lot of fierce force and storytelling in every piece of his reds and oranges. And if you see the strong black strokes, so everything gets eventually outlined. When he'd start working, and I've seen, he'd first start with the black and then paint in. So strong, bold, primary colors.
ما يميز أيضاً مقبول حسين يتعامل بفطريته مع اللون مباشرة. في بعض الفنانين الآخرين يخلطون اللون، يطبخون اللون على الباليتا وبعدين يستخدمونه على القماش. لكن مقبول حسين فعلى طول مباشرة بالتيوب، ما يخلط، ما يروح للرماديات والشغل، لا يروح دائما للألوان الحادة، الأحمر، الأخضر من التيوب مباشرة.
He encouraged people to experiment. I think that changed a lot. On the Indian art scene, it put Indian art on top. It exposed us to the world and the world to us.
With recognition from the art world came the chance to finally work with the artistic medium he saw as the most complete of them all.
Today, a work of art is not confined to a limited source. Its materials, say, color pigments, brushes, canvas, which I have been doing since my childhood. But now, I've tried to tackle the film medium.
And this cinematic side project, his first ever film, went on to win the Golden Bear in Berlin. That's just the kind of genius he was. But despite his overwhelming success, M.F. Husain had always had his fair share of critics. And in the 1990s and early 2000s, it reached a turning point.
Not afraid to court controversy, M.F. Husain found himself sharply criticized by conservative Indians for his nude portrayal of Hindu gods and goddesses.
Whenever he paints someone nude, he is doing it to humiliate that person.
Although he argues that was media hype about a subject that has always been part of India's culture.
Whether Muslim or non-Muslim, it is unethical, inhuman. I condemn it.
It's unfortunate to see a man of excellence being so prejudiced and biased and hateful.
In 2006, M.F. Husain decided to leave his home country of India. He would spend the twilight of his career as a citizen of Qatar, an honor granted to him by one of his greatest admirers, Her Highness Sheikh Moza bin Nasser.
Controversy is not something that he relied on. It's what people need. It's not him. People need the controversy.
He didn't care about it. He said, majority of the people are with me and they appreciate my art. It is only the handful.
He said, it's not like I'm left India. I have met Her Highness Sheikh Moza and she has this amazing view. So I want to do something new now. I'm going to work there. Bitterness, resentment, being, and none of those negative things ever affected him. He just didn't let it come in his life.
And he always said, that is why I'm light. I am not carrying any baggage on me.
During the last years of his life in Qatar, M.F. Husain began conceptualizing what was arguably his most ambitious work. An art installation that tackled themes of force, modernity, movement, and power, motifs that embody his artistic career. Husain wouldn't live to see the completion of his last piece, but with the support of Her Highness Sheikh Moza bin Nasser, the project was finished posthumously. It is an installation of unprecedented size and investment, the result of a perfect storm that saw one of the most inventive minds of the century joining forces with an imaginative and determined patron. Seeroo fil Ard was inaugurated in 2019 at Qatar Foundation. And now, well, now you're ready. Now that you've seen the humble beginnings of one of the most important artists of the century, a man with a body of work so vast that it's impossible to catalog. A man who saw 2 world wars and the independence of his country. A visionary who witnessed as men controlled animals, then machines, then the skies. So welcome to M.F. Husain's last artwork.
What I would say about his legacy, he at times would just say, I want my works to go to people who are going to have museums so that everyone can see it. And then sometimes he would be sitting and saying, you know what, when I'm gone, just burn all my works. I don't want anything.
Everything was as if he had planned it himself. He was not a man from this planet, I think.
That film certainly left me, and I'm quite sure it left all of us, in a very particular pensive mood. And I have to say that it really reminds us of the kinds of struggles that great artists have gone through, But as an Indian citizen, I'm also deeply, deeply struck by how cruelly and crudely Hussein was misrepresented towards the end of his life and career. The works for which he was attacked had actually been made much earlier in the 60s and 70s, and they had been shown, and they'd been shown in the context of religious festivals. This is really a story not about an artist insulting his audience, but about an audience ceasing to understand what this artist was really doing. One could not have thought of a more plural, more responsive, more incredibly generous spirit than Hussein. And I'm moved for other reasons too. I'm thinking back to exactly 10 years ago. I was in Venice after having installed India's first ever national pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which I curated. And we were just enjoying some peace and quiet after months of hectic work when the news came to us from London that Hussein had passed away. And it was an incredible sense of loss. On one hand, we just had a great international triumph for Indian art in Venice. And on the other hand, there was the tragedy of losing Hussein. And it's really with these thoughts that I now will invite our speakers of today to share their thoughts about Hussein. And one other thought that I will put out there is that although he was always identified with a secular, modernizing movement in art, he was never far from spirituality. And it's not a coincidence that the title of this last work, Seeroo fi al-Ardh, comes from the opening line of the 20th verse of Surah 29, Al-Ankabut of the Holy Quran, which says, "Travel across the earth and see how God has originated all creation." And let's remember that this was a complex figure that we are dealing with, someone who was intensely modern, but who also went right back into the living archive of tradition, of spirituality, of religious thought. So for the next 45 minutes, we will segue now into this conversation. And I'd like to introduce our speakers. And if you're joining us via Zoom, remember that there is live simultaneous translation in Arabic and Urdu and Hindi. There's an interpretation button on the dashboard at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you click on it, your language of preference will show up. But first, please join me in welcoming our panelists for this evening. I'd first like to welcome Leila Ibrahim Bacha, who is the Qatar Foundation's Senior Art Specialist. She's an expert in the art world of Qatar and knows intimately well the Qatar Foundation's own extensive array of public art. And she's been at the heart of the Seeroo fi al-Ardh project in bringing it to fruition at Education City as its project supervisor. Good evening, Leila. Welcome to the
Good evening. Good evening, Rajit. Thank you for this introduction.
I now introduce Bose Krishnamachari, who is an old friend and comrade from the cultural domain back home. Krish, as I call him, is an artist, curator, and he is famously co-founder and president of the Kochi Muziris Biennale, which is India's largest international exhibition of contemporary art. He's a dynamic figure on both the Indian and the global art scenes. And I've always been in admiration of how he's balanced his own individual practice with a Hussein-like spirit of generosity and empathy in reaching out to others and sustaining the practices of others. Krish, it's a real pleasure to have you here this evening.
Hi.
And hi, Krish. You're with us? You're not on mute?
Yeah.
Super. Okay, great. And our third speaker is Dimitri Yuri, who's the award-winning director of this documentary that we just premiered. He's associated with the Film House, which is the production company that's made the documentary. And we'll draw him out as we go along about his experience researching and creating this beautiful testament to Hussein. He's a Brazilian screenwriter and director, but he calls Doha home. He's a graduate of the Qatar Foundation, Virginia Commonwealth University School of the Arts. Welcome, Dimitri.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. And the artist's son, Mustafa Hussain, who we all saw on screen just now, was scheduled to join us for the panel too. But unfortunately, he's been called away because of a family emergency. So our thoughts and our best wishes are with him and his family at this time. Welcome, all of you. And I'm going to do this to put out a roadmap. We'll do 3 rounds of conversation. And I'll ask each of you in turn to engage with Hussain, his legacy, his work. And we'll take it forward as we go along. So I'm going to begin, Bose, by putting a question to you. Now, whilst all of us around this table have been deeply and intensely concerned with Hussain's work for one reason or another, you and I are the only ones who actually knew Hussain and shared in the cultural life of Bombay during the late 80s and through the 90s, when he was such a prominent figure. You and I were young people starting out, and Hussain was a colossus who strode the scene. So I'd like to ask you, Krish, how do you remember Hussain, who we're celebrating this evening? What is your sense of how he influenced our art world? How did he inspire you? In what way was he iconic to you as a young artist? Could I draw you out on this?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can. Go ahead, Krish.
It's
Krish, can you hear us? Okay, I think we might have lost Krish briefly, but whilst we're waiting for him to, oh, are you back, Krish? Can you hear us?
I'm here.
Okay,
I can hear you well.
Okay, great. Your screen froze for a bit, so we thought we'd lost you. So, Krish, would you like to take that?
So since '85, my JJ School of Art, since then, I used to see him at gallery spaces, especially Pandol. He used to be a regular visitor. Samovar, the cafeteria, at Jahangir Art Gallery. And definitely I have great memory of 1989, there was an important exhibition, 125th year of Times of India. There was a celebration of 7-day public art project. And Hussain visited, I remember, around 1 a.m. at the Victoria Terminus. That time it was called Victoria Terminus, now it is called Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus. So there is regionalism and those kind of stuff. And there are so many other anecdotes. I wanted to say that, he was part of all kinds of cult, all kinds of, you take hedonism or law life. He was with them both. And he was the avid traveler. I would say obsessive traveler. I met him in different places. There are some fantastic anecdotes mentioned to me by Akbar Padamsi, late Akbar Padamsi. He said he was one of the impatient man he's ever seen. Impatient, nervous, and those kind of things. He was waiting at, the anecdote is something like this. He and his friends were waiting at, artist friends were waiting at Paris airport. And the flight got delayed or something. And after a few minutes, his friends were looking around him. And by the time he reached in some London or some other places, he doesn't have that kind of even half an hour waiting or 15 minutes waiting. He doesn't have to. I mean, I met him in many places. One, the last meeting was at Dubai with a lot of my artist friends, Sadhul Dodia and Sudhir Patwardhan and many others. I remember he used to come to Malini Gulrajani's gallery one by one, many times, multiple times. He really wanted to come back to India. He was really missing India, that kind of feeling I had. I mean, also he took us around, take us around and, gone for lunch. And, I remember he was sketching, he was signing, this what is that called? Chinese noodle stick. What is that called? So his hands were in 90 when he was 90, 91 year old. His hands were so straight, and my hands shiver right now. Like, I mean, he was amazing when it comes to, but always a kind of, I've seen him as a kind of really passionate person. I remember I'm from Kerala, originally from Kerala. I have a lot of memories about his works in Kerala. There was an IAS officer, he was the Calicut collector, and now Nidhi Aayog director or something, Amitabh Khan. He brought him first to Kerala. And there were two in 1992 that after the Babri Masjid incident. That was an important year in everybody's life when you are in India. I mean, so he was brought in to Kerala to work on a large project. The centerpiece was made by him. And also Mr. M.A. Baby, that then culture minister of Kerala. And also they had, it's a project called Manaviyam. At the public space, they have project, So he's also done some 100-meter long canvas or something like that, so which I haven't seen. But he lived in Kerala I was talking to Amitabh Khan, and he was saying that, Madhavi Dixit's passion and obsession came out of his Kerala visit. At the backwaters in Kerala, he was spending a lot of time and, painting, and, that's time he was watching this film and, got obsessed. And anyway, I have a lot to say about him because, I used to visit some art collectors, artist studios, his interest is not just painting. He was a painter, sculptor, a designer, architect. I can see everything in him. And also, as everybody knows, he's also a filmmaker, which that 1967 film, which he got the Golden Bear Award in Berlin Film Festival. So when we look at him as a kind of inspirational figure, inspiration comes from, he's the person who, none of the other artists are really known by the public, like a common man in India, till now, because the opportunities of showing the works, and he's also worked with, he was very generous in my knowledge. One of my friends in London, she's a Malayali actress, a very celebrated actress called Nadia Moidin. So she showed me a couple of Husain's drawing, generously he sketched her daughter's portraits. And the same way he came to Kerala a long time ago, and he went to a school exhibition. He was attending a school exhibition. Kids didn't know who is M.F. Husain, but the next day's newspaper revealed that M.F. Husain was sketching with the kids. These are the kind of things kids who, as I mentioned, the hedonism and all that, and the common and ultimate. Everywhere he was, everywhere in that sense. I can go on talking about his presence. Yeah, thank you.
Krish, thank you so much for sharing that. And as you were speaking, I thought to myself, yes, my goodness, he went through phases where he signed the signature on his painting was so often in different languages. He signed in Roman script, he signed in Devanagari, he signed in Urdu, he signed in Malayalam. So many of the Kerala works have his signature in Malayalam, and some of those serigraphs are actually in the collection of the Qatar Foundation. And it's actually marvelous. I have to say that the audience in Doha has seen that 1967 film through the eyes of a painter, because we showed it at the exhibition that I curated in 2019 for Mathaf, the Museum of Modern Art, and I thought I'd put out an image of the catalog that we did. So audiences in Doha have actually seen that film. And the didactics that we did, all of the wall texts were in English, in Arabic, and in Malayalam, as a matter of fact. So that, I think, Krish, will please you very much. But I'm going to turn with these thoughts to Leila. Leila, you bring a different set of perspectives. We heard the the marvelous, rich, plural account of what Hussein means to Indian artists and Indian audiences. You came to Hussein from a West Asian perspective, from your training in art history at the Sorbonne, and the academic work you did at UCL. So could you tell us about your response? How did you get to know Hussein, his work, and all this time that you've spent looking at his work and living with it?
Sure, Ranjit. So I wasn't lucky enough to meet the artists like yourself and Koshi. My encounter with M.F. Hussein was a bit different. I had what I call an indirect encounter with the artist during my work in Qatar Foundation. It was when I was in charge of moving and preserving all the elements that were in his studio in Qatar, the place where he worked and lived during the last few years of his life. I had the chance to look at his tools, brushes, paint, palettes, and even like looking at how he created the environment around him when he wanted to paint or create his work. My second encounter was when I was supporting the foundation in realizing Seeroo fil Ard, his latest work. I had the chance to study and research all his drawings and his writings. It was kind of diving into the artist's brain, trying to understand his creative process. And every time I dive more, I was amazed how much he was unpredictable and creative. Later on, when I started meeting the public, visiting his works in Vacation City, whether after the exhibition in Mathaf or Seeroo fil Ard, hearing this astonishment of the public after seeing his work made me realize how Maqbool Fida Husain, when he created his work, he wasn't only fulfilling a creative urge, but rather he was aspiring for a long-term impact in the community. Going back to what Kush said, like about the artist being very generous, like giving the public, this was his aspiration. And maybe what you have said at the beginning also, looking into expanding the human imagination. It was like beyond only creating work, it was this long-term impact in the society. So when I think about his work process now, after I learned about how he used to create his work in his work environment, in his studio, if you want, like the inception of his idea, how it used to, the space of it, and working later on the realization of some of his work, at the end experience, how the public received it, I can only think about how great his influence on his generation is, and how this influence, to my opinion, my very humble opinion, is going to continue to even generations to come. So I'm very glad to be part of it. And the artist legacy, I think it's very obvious now. And again, it will continue maybe for more generations to come.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lala, for giving us your perspective and your hopes and dreams, which we all share, for how this installation is going to speak to present and future audiences and continue Hussein's legacy. I'm going to carry those thoughts now to you, Dimitri. We're talking about an artist who lived to be nearly 100, and you had about 10 minutes as your duration to give us a sense of his life, which is, of course, the kind of challenge that filmmakers are aware of and they live with, and they know how to make this an intense and memorable experience, as you've done. So what I'd like to ask you is this. Coming to Hussein from another, let us say, geographical or cultural location, what was it that really stood out for you in his life, in his personality, his imagination, and what was it that you really wanted to convey through the film? Could you talk to us about this?
Yeah, absolutely. 10 minutes was hard, but the original brief was supposed to be around 5 minutes. So as soon as we started putting things together, we realized that 5 minutes would not be nearly enough. But we're happy with the running time now. I think it hints at all the necessary stories without going on for too long. I think in the process of making the film, the thing that fascinated me about Hussein the most was just I always saw him as an observer of the world and of human experience and of human life. And Seeroo fil Ard really highlights that. It's almost like you're watching the progress of humanity through his eyes. And that is true for all of his works. this sense of presence, of allowing your mind to create and being, you know, just flowing with the art, is something that really fascinated me. And also how at times he didn't really take himself so seriously, you know, always questioning at the end of the day, is any of this serious? You know, do I want my works to go to a museum, or do I want to just burn them and let them pass and have the impact that those works had on people stay with them? But the works, the physical works don't have to be here anymore, you know? It was all about the experience. It was all about observing. And yeah, and when we approach a movie like this, you can go about it two ways. You can describe the life of this artist. You can describe the installation, and you can create something pretty good. After all, he had so many interesting stories, and he was such an incredible persona. But or we could do it the other way, which is to learn from his works, learn from his philosophy of creating, and try to tell his story through not only the function that it needs to fulfill, but also through the form that he would appreciate and that he would be interested in, which is what we did with the you know, abstract recreations and some more cinematic shots here and there, trying to tell his story in a way that he would be happy with, you know, not just getting the facts right, but being able to be creative like he would have wanted us to be.
Thanks so much, Dimitri. I see what you mean, because for him, it wasn't just the content or the affect, which was very important indeed, but he took great pleasure in experimenting with new forms. I mean, it's also not well recognized that he was a writer. I mean, he was a poet and a memoirist, and he wrote in two languages, in English and in Urdu. And as we get into round two of our conversation, I thought I'd just hold up something that he gave me a very long time ago. It's an exceptionally rare thing. I get the impression that this is all the wrong way up, but you're probably seeing it the right way, right? Mm-hmm. It's the catalog, which we in India used to call the brochure, of his first retrospective, which was held in March 1969. And it was called 21 Years of Painting. So I thought I'd just, you know, the surprised possession. So I thought I'd just share it with you in the spirit of celebrating Husain, that even whilst he was a pilgrim of the earth, he was constantly a nomad, he was traveling, but he also had a great regard for some kind of institutions. So whether it was regular retrospectives or large-scale exhibitions, or the 4 museums that at one time or another he set up for his work, and we'll talk about that a little. But what I want to do right now as we open the second round of our conversation is to turn to you, Bose. Now we're all looking forward to physically seeing Seeroo fi al-Arض. But it's been such a long journey. And I want to ask you particularly, because your career in so many ways mirrors his. You too have been greatly excited by different media. You've worked in painting, in sculptural forms, in assemblage, with the installation, with public art projects. When you look at this work, this last work of Husain's, how do you see it reflecting his creative vision? Do you see it as a kind of testament to the totality of his art making? Could we have your responses?
Oh, it's amazing to see the culmination in a way that it's like Katha Foundation could bring up his vision in actual. It's fantastic to see that. And there is a kind of performative element which you could bring it on stage. There is a kind of theatricality. There is a kind of architectural elements as well as cultural, you know, assemblages. You can see all kinds of art on stage, which, you know, that's the success of, you know, that, you know, I haven't, you know, you can't experience everything right now, but I could sense that it's a kind of fantastic work. I mean, like I have seen his original designs at Bal Chabda's home. All the furnitures, you know, like Bal Chabda is an artist, self-taught artist, and he was good friends. And he was one of the first gallerists in Bombay, in my knowledge. And he used to spend a little bit of time with some artists' home in Malabar Hill. And that's a place I have seen, first time seen Picasso's ceramic pieces to large-scale Husain's works, and Raza, Gaitonde, all kind of greats, the modernists. So that furniture, first of all, when you get into a space, what is visually attractive is that the language used for Bal's home. The same way he's done with, when he's working with great architects like the Pritzker Award winner, V.V. Doshi. The Gufa is another example of, there's a kind of cave kind of space. There is a kind of intimacy created for public to, it can be a kind of pavilion for readers, pavilion for performances, short performances and things like that. And I was in his Hyderabad museum space, like a long time ago, but these kind of memory. And the last visit in Dubai, he took us to two of his homes in Dubai. And it was awesome to see that inspirational figure. He was generous, he was passionate, impatient. I can go on talking about him as a kind of, he believes in process. I think he's, as Yuri mentioned, he's an observer. He observed everything. I've seen him in 1 a.m. at Victoria Terminus, you remember? I mean, like, he doesn't have to be there. I mean, like, but I mean, I'm very enthusiastic. That enthusiasm from Pandapur, a village, to a city, a self-made man. In my life also, I could relate. I was born in a beautiful small village in Kerala. To move to Bombay, Mumbai given me everything. So I also say that I'm a Mumbaikar Mallu. It is important where you come from, that given you the strength of the roots and the awareness of politics. And what I like about Hussein, he was really secular. He was a loving man. That secularism, which we need to, I believe that is what is important in our contemporary life in India or anywhere else in the world. I think, yeah, with that.
Thanks so much, Bose. You're absolutely right. I mean, Hussein's entire ethic was one of empathy. He believed in bringing people together, not pulling them apart. But I also want to focus now on these collaborative aspects of his career that you spoke of. And we know, of course, famously his collaboration with Doshi on the Gufa brought two great creative imaginations and intellects into a space of play. So I want to turn to you, Leila, with that thought. It's one thing to make a beautiful sketch and leave behind a wish list, if you will. But it's quite another to actually figure out all the technology that's going to get all the moving parts in sequence. So could I ask you to tell us about what the journey was like from Hussein's sketches and drawings to the actually achieved installation, and what that involved in scientific and technological terms?
We were lucky enough in the foundation to have enough documentations, writing, drawings from the artist himself about Seeroo fil Ard. He was so detailed about the description of his work, as if he had Seeroo fil Ard already made in his imagination, and all he did is putting it on papers. And of course, it's not only sketches that we have. The artist supervised the very first stages of the artwork. He worked on a very small mock-up of Seeroo fil Ard, exactly what we have right now, the stage, the horses, the mosaic wall, the sculptures, all in a small scale. And he used to show it in his studio in Qatar. This mock-up is currently on display next to the original Seeroo fil Ard after finalizing it, to show, the journey from the beginning to the end, from the sketch to the mock-up to the final artwork. And he was also there to witness the very first life-size horse made out of Murano that he created in Italy. And we have a very nice picture of him posing very proudly next to this horse. So everything was very much kind of taking his vision, taking what he left for us, and only continuing the production all the way until it's finally achieved. And we tried as much as we could to be faithful to every single detail he left for us in order to be really creating his work and continue his legacy and finalizing to what he wished the artwork to be at the end. And as you have mentioned, it's very complicated technically also, because the artwork is not only a show that you sit and you watch something. It has a lot of elements. For those who maybe don't know, Seeroo fil Ard is a show where you sit and you watch a whole performance of light, of music, of a stage that goes up and down with cars and horses, and you have a backdrop made out of mosaic, huge mosaic wall, sculptures in bronze, all in one location to create the concepts and the artwork Seeroo fil Ard. So it's not only every single element, but also the hosting of this show. As I said, there are 5 horses, life-size horses made out of Murano, made out of glass, and very fragile. That we had to put it on a stage that goes up and down, synchronized with the music. So to build the stage, we had a whole team of technicians, of engineers, of architects, of managers, just to see how we can realize such stage and program it to the music, to the light, to hold those horses and those cars in a certain speed, so we don't make anything in danger, like we avoid all the cracks or anything to happen to those very fragile art pieces. And this is why, like, when people say why it took so long to finish, I only answer, you have to come and see how complicated it is. And how the artist, when he created it, and I have to say it was futuristic, we're talking about 2009, thinking about such a performance, such an art installation with all this complexity. This is, again, what I come back to, like the artist was completing maybe his art life journey, because he did everything, as everyone had mentioned. Like, he did paintings, he did cinemas, billboard, he did films, he did furniture, as if, like, and he was a writer, he was everything. And in this specific artwork, Seeroo fil Ard, he joined all those components and put them in one single artwork. And again, it was a long journey, looking into all the details, working with the people who worked on the artwork itself from the beginning to continuing it. And I think when I always remember how Mustafa, his son, that he unfortunately couldn't join us today, when he came the very first time to see the artwork after it's finished, I remember I was so nervous because Mustafa was so much involved at the beginning of the work, and he knows it from beginning, but he didn't see it until it was finalized. I remember seeing the tears in his eyes, and I was like, oh my God, that's an accomplishment. So it is a very complex work, but we are very happy that the foundation was able to finish it as the artist was expecting, as per his vision. And I'm looking forward to hear everybody's idea and opinions once they visit it.
Thanks so much, Leila. I'm going to turn now to Dimitri again. And I've just been thinking, as you were so eloquently describing the project, Leila, it just struck me that it's an extraordinary fantasy. And that reminded me that whilst everybody knows that Husain began his career painting cinema billboards, not too many people know that he also spent the first decade and a few years of his artistic career as a designer of toys. So he was also a toy maker. So when I look at Seeroo fil Ard, the feeling I have is also of toys that have come magnificently to life in some ways. The notions of the roller coaster, all of this comes into play. But Dimitri, what I want to ask you is this. You clearly had a great resonance with Husain's work through the notion of play or playfulness, the pageant, all this is clearly there. But as a filmmaker, did you have to bridge a certain gulf between your own aesthetic, your own training, your own generation, if I may say, and Hussein's? How did you make that leap? That would be, it would be greatly interesting to know.
I think that might have been a case with any other artist, but there's something about Hussein that's a bit timeless, and I felt like I could relate to it, even being from a completely different part of the world, different generations. It's a very good point that you mentioned that the importance of play. I mean, it's not for any reason that we go to the theater to see a play. This performance of life happening in front of us, and in a way, that's what I get looking at a lot of Hussein's work, whether it is his films or his paintings or his writings. Going back to the theme that we mentioned about him being the observer, I can't help to shake this feeling that he was just at all times watching the most complex and beautiful film that he had ever seen, except that we call it day-to-day and everyday life and going to work, but he was experiencing it as the beautiful narrative that it is, and it shines through the work. I think there was one more question that you asked that maybe I've missed.
No, that was really the question about, did you feel there was a gulf that you had to bridge? But you've already told us how you.
Yeah, no, it was surprising to see that, a lot of times when you're studying a different artist, you have to, okay, what is this person interested in? What kind of themes does he deal with? But with Hussein, it was a lot of it was me realizing that we had very similar concerns and areas of interest. So it was a very pleasant experience to just, hear his thoughts on something and then trying to use our medium to display it visually for him.
Fabulous. Thank you. And I'm glad that you flagged this notion of how Hussein was timeless or universal. But it strikes me that to be truly timeless, you also have to be incredibly timely. You have to be constantly relevant, and great artists are. And as I come now again to you, Krish, in round 3, I'm thinking back to all of the Hussein exhibitions that you and I saw as young people starting out in the late 80s and late 90s. He was always responding to things. And we knew that even much earlier throughout his career, he had an incredible curiosity about everything. So if it was physics and optics, he engaged with the work of the Nobel Prize winning scientist, C.V. Raman, and produced actually a well-researched exhibition called the Raman Effect. He engaged with our colonial history, our colonial past, and out of that came the Ardh series. He responded to theater, the work of an incredibly brilliant playwright called Vijay Tendulkar, and from that came the Ghanshiram Kotwal series. It was a meditation on theater and on politics. And then when the tragedy of the Gulf War exploded at the beginning of the 90s, there he was. It was a very impromptu exhibition. We walked into the Pandol Gallery one day and there were a lot of new Hussein drawings, which he had just produced. So, Krish, my question to you is this: if Hussein were with us today, how do you think he would have responded to all of the challenges that we face as a species, as a planet, whether it's the pandemic or the gross economic asymmetries, the violence and the conflict? How do you think Hussein would have responded today?
Ranjit, I think, it's a great artist, a great creative person is actually unpredictable. Hussein would have been, you cannot read him, like what is he going to do next? That's the kind of thing I believe that is one of the reasons he sustained. He was always new to the time and understand that very moment, timely, as you mentioned, timelessness and timely. The timeliness, he was really on time with each and every project. And he would have been with the scientists, he would have been with young startup guys to make something new. He would have, like maybe Olafur Eliasson come, that's a kind of collaborative work. He would have got into many collaborative projects and public projects. And he's a public man, like he was only, as I mentioned earlier, everybody knew him, by name at least in India, like each and everyone in the even villages, Hussein, everybody knows. And I wanted to stay here before getting into other conversation. I would like to congratulate Qatar Foundation and Laila, because I think, commitment, patronage is really important to make anybody's career relevant. And you've done an incredible job in the Qatar family to the Qatar Foundation. And, you have fantastic minds like Ranjit as a kind of friend. And all these things work, definitely. It is an important aspect, that patronage, commitment to make as an artist's vision. And, so you've done a fantastic job. Thank you. Yeah. And I want to just remember just an anecdote, last time I was sitting at, he came and sat at one by one gallery outside with the Ferrari. And one of my friend asked, as a, what speed you take in the Ferrari, what kind of drive you take. So he said, I'm not interested in the speed of it. I'm interested in the form. That's kind of, aesthetics. He was very much part of the aesthetics more than the speed of the kind of. So there are so many anecdotes like this with Hussein, yeah.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Krish. I'm going to break sequence here now, and instead of going to Lala, I'll let you have the last word, but I'm going to turn to Dimitri now. Dimitri, it's very clear that you yourself draw on multiple histories, possibly multiple diasporas. You've lived in different parts of the world, and you're an alumnus of the Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar. Do you think that your immersion in the ethos of Doha, which itself is multicultural, being an education city, do you think that that somehow helped you in a way prepare for the making of this film? And a linked question would be, what is your ideal audience for this film?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we received the brief for this documentary, I jumped on it. I said, I have to be involved in this somehow. I studied art history at Virginia Commonwealth, so I always had an interest in the art world. It's one of my favorite things to study. Deep down, I knew that my passion really was with filmmaking, but I always thought that art history would be such an incredible way to inform even my own personal own personal artworks. It's also where I first learned about M.F. Husain. I had a great professor, the late Dina Bangdel, that taught us an entire class on him. And yeah, from that moment, being introduced to this variety of artists from all over the world that I wouldn't have heard of if I was in Brazil or not interested in the art world, it was very eye-opening. And other than that, I mean, not just being in VCU where you're surrounded by designers and artists around you, but even in EC, creating something like a film or a documentary, it's a multidisciplinary thing, really. There's graphic design, there's interior design, there's fashion design, there's everything there. And being able to draw inspiration from all the people that I've worked with or studied with was absolutely essential. As for the audience, honestly, anyone with even the slightest interest in art and anyone that is fascinated by this interesting fact that we as people try to explain this endless mystery of the fact that we are here through creativity. And Husain is one of the best examples of this. Someone really trying to, work his creative muscles to understand what's going on. What is this all about? And that's where the universal side of Husain shines for me the most. So if anyone has an interest in art and interested in the mind of artists and how they try to make sense of the world around them, I think Husain is one of the best subjects to get into, because he's so transparent and so mysterious and just overall so cool.
That's marvelous, Dimitri. Thank you so much for that. And yes, it's absolutely true that his appeal is magnetic and it's universal. And it's also true that, he belonged to a generation of artists who were struggling or wrestling with the possibility of creating a language that spoke to their own local, regional situation, but that also was part of a larger international art-making language of modernism. But it's also the case, as Krish was saying earlier, that Husain was one of the few, if not the only one, who reached out to the other arts in this magnificent way. He kind of realized what Wagner would have called a Gesamtkunstwerk, the coming together of the various arts into a totality. That seems to have been the dream that he always had, and which, as we see, is now being realized here. I also want to flag the fact that I touched on this a little earlier, but he eventually created 4 different museums. There was Cinema Ghar in Hyderabad, Husain Ki Sarai outside Delhi, the Husain Sankalan in Bangalore, and famously the Ahmedabad Gufa, the collaboration with Balkrishna Doshi. And it was his hope also that there would eventually be a museum in Doha. But whilst we get there, it seems to me that Seeroo fi al-Ardh is some manifestation of this desire to create an institution that's open, that is interactive, that brings the public in to really experience art in a multidimensional way. So Leila, I'm going to let you have the last word before we move into question time. It's been a tough time across the planet for art, for artists, for people who love art, and for art audiences. We've all been effectively in front of a screen like we are right now. What is your sense of how the public will respond once the pandemic recedes and the lockdowns become a memory and people are actually able to come? How do you think people will respond, and what sorts of audiences do you foresee? A local audience in Doha, already a complex audience, but also an international audience? Do you see it as a kind of destination artwork? Could I ask you to speculate on this?
Yes, sure. First of all, thank you both for your kind words. Like, I really thank you, and I'm really looking forward to receive you here in Doha. Going back to your question, Ranjit, I know that there is a lot of international audience here, so maybe I would like to keep things in context. Education City is the physical location of Qatar Foundation, and we have an art scene, what we refer to as an art scene. We have the public art collections on display in all the buildings, in the outdoor. We have the museums, and we have exhibitions area. We have a lot of programming, talks, and conferences that taking place all year round. So when the artist Maqbool Fida Husain was invited to Doha to work and to live here, it was because of the art strategy that we have in Qatar Foundation. We don't look into on displaying artwork only, but through the art, we try to introduce the public to the identity of Qatar and of the community itself where they live in. When Maqbool Fida Husain came to Doha, he came to work on a collection of work that represent the Arab and Islamic civilization, because as you may know, his family has origins from Yemen, and also he was Muslim himself, and he was trained to be an imam. So this is why the Seeroo fi al-Ardh is a great continuation and a great add for the Qatar Foundation art collection and the scene itself. Of course, being the largest, the most complex, maybe if you want, and having Maqbool Fida Husain being the back of it is adding to its value. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, we had to close not only Seeroo fi al-Ardh, but most of the artwork wasn't accessible at that time. Being in the campus for education, for us, the educational part of artwork is very, very important, transferring the knowledge behind the artwork and providing the artwork for everyone to visit. This is one of our objectives. So the COVID kind of made it a bit hard to be made, and this is why we're doing this conference online, for example, because we want to still be connecting with the public. We want to keep telling the stories about those artwork and Seeroo fi al-Ardh specifically. I'm hoping that when the pandemic is, or the restrictions for COVID-19 is a bit less, we're going to open the door for the Seeroo fi al-Ardh again in Education City. And as you know, we've opened it up in December 2019, January 2020, just right before we go on a lockdown. But even during this very few months, the amount of people who came, the amount of interest that was for Seeroo في الأرض make me actually say that I'm expecting and I'm confident that the artwork will be a destination for not only the local community, but also for people coming, visiting Qatar, or even transiting Qatar. It's something worth for you to come to Doha just only for a few hours and watch it. It is one of a kind experience, and I'm looking forward to receive everyone in this artwork and education city.
Thanks so much, Lala, for that, truly inspiring and hopeful sense of how people will respond to Husain's his posthumous work. And as you were speaking about the multiple layers and dimensions of his cultural identity, I was thinking too that in so many ways, he embodied what certainly we in South Asia think of as a Sufi spirituality. There was something that was outward, zahir. There was an interiority, which was batin. And also the reason why, when I had to choose a title for the retrospective scale exhibition that I did at Mathaf, I too went back to the Holy Quran and referred to the 100th verse of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Adiyat. That's why it was called Adiyat al-Shams, the horses of the sun. Because the word, thank you, because the word, as you all know, not only means horses, but it can also mean flashes, appearances, visionary glimpses. So we're looking here at an artist who thought at multiple levels. And as we come now to the point where we open up the floor to questions, many people, our marvelous audience has posed many questions as we've been speaking. But I want to thank you all, Krish, Laila, Dimitri, for having shared your insights and your experiences so generously this evening. So hold on there, because now these questions are coming to you. I'm going to start with, I'm not going to go in order. I was beseeched to go in order, but I tend to be slightly disorderly in my proceedings. So I'm going to go to questions in a slightly rhizomatic way. Dadiba Pandol, who's a dear old friend to Krish and me, a major gallerist, a lifelong friend of Husain's. His father, Kali Pandol, was Husain's gallerist. Dadiba has a question for Dimitri. Hi, Dimitri. Would love to know your reaction as a filmmaker today to Husain's 1967 work, Through the Eyes of a Painter, his film. Would you respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine if you were, I guess at any time, if you were to think about, okay, I want to make a movie that's going to go to Berlin and win the Golden Bear, you would have all kinds of ideas of what form and structure and what kind of themes this movie should have, what's trendy right now, what people are into. And when you look at Through the Eyes of a Painter, you realize that Husain kind of threw all the rules out the window. And he was just like, I'm going to take this as a matter of first principles. I'm going to do this based on what I feel is the right way to do it. I'll create something that is unapologetically me. And then you get the recognition and people connecting to it. So in a way, what this movie reminded me of is that the thing that you're going to make and that is going to really resonate with people is a thing that you're going to make not necessarily worrying about resonating with people. You're going to make something very intimate, very personal, very you. And hopefully there will be other people out there that will relate to that, as I did watching his film. So yeah, it was very refreshing to see a filmmaker take on a project like this and just be so innovative and so unlike anything else you've ever seen. For those who haven't seen the film, we have a little excerpt of it in the documentary, but I would recommend you guys try to watch it. It's unlike anything you've ever seen before, for sure.
Thanks so much, Dimitri. I'll just add a footnote to what you said. When we showed it in 2019 at Madhaf, it was amazing that we were able to make a projection from the YouTube video, because the Films Division of India, which commissioned that work under a visionary leader about a decade ago, put out really projection quality videos. So you can actually see this film in the privacy of your home. If you want to put it on a beamer and project it, it still works. It was really one of those early moments, Dimitri, I'm sure you'll agree. It really expanded the meaning of the documentary. It's really a film poem in some sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I'm going to turn now to you, Krish. There's a question for you, and I'm going to look for it. Yes, from Meher, who's following us on YouTube, evidently. We are across many platforms. The question is as follows. Husain is a symbol of India's cultural plurality. What makes his work resonate with global audiences? How does it continue to resonate with global audiences? So Krish, could you take that?
Oh, I may not be the right person to say it, but I think it is Husain played that role. That modernity was really known through his work, but internationally. Indian contemporary art has been discussed internationally through M.F. Husain's work. As I mentioned earlier, his travels to his relationship he created with all his friends around the world. And I remember his one of his last exhibitions, in Serpentine Gallery, when I was also part of that exhibition when Hans Ulrich Obrist and Gunnar Kavren and Thierry Raspail curated this Indian Highway show. And that, I think, Husain's work was the starting point at the Serpentine Gallery. I mean, each and every step, when you take 1947 Progressive Artist Group, even if it was started by, great mind D'Souza, I mean, all this is really connect with Husain's contribution as a kind of maverick. You can say he was a street artist, and a street artist to a global creative mind. Maybe Ranjit, you are very poetic, you are articulate, you are academically better. Maybe you can say it, but I think Husain played that. He created a map for younger generation can travel, from one destination to the another. I think travel makes a person much more open, and he was transparent, as Yuri Dimitri mentioned. He was transparent and really, I think it is important. When you are a creative person, I think these are things naturally to happen. And he was very natural, organic. He was very fluid. Yeah, that's made him a universal figure.
Great, thanks, Krish. Leila, there's a question from YouTube from Hanadi. How relevant is Seeroo fi al-Ardh for the local community? I mean, you touched on this before, but maybe this is a question of local vis-a-vis international.
Yeah, well, actually, I can talk about the relationship of Maqbool Fida Husain with Doha, because Maqbool Fida Husain, it wasn't his first time coming to Doha at the end of his life for his residency. He had an exhibition in the 80s, in 1984, at the Sheraton Hotel, and surprisingly, this solo exhibition was also titled Seeroo fi al-Ardh. So the relationship of the artist with Seeroo fi al-Ardh and Doha is going all the way back to the 80s. It's not something new. It's not something that just like at the end of his life, he came to create his work. It was really a deep connection with Doha all the way back. And I think it's very important, this connection with the local community, because as I have mentioned before, the identity of the artist, the work that he does, the Arab and Islamic civilization interest that he has, and the collection that he was working on at the end of his life, that unfortunately he couldn't finish the collection, but hoping that this part of this collection that he was able to finish will be displayed to the public very much soon, when hopefully the museum of Maqbool Fida Husain in Doha will gonna be established and constructed soon.
Thanks, Leila. There's actually a number of questions precisely on that subject about Muhammad Muslim, who asks, is there any plan for an M.F. Husain museum in Qatar with his available works? There's Namita Srivastav, who expresses the wish that someday we could see his handwritten notes, sketches, and nuggets of information. So really, and of course, there have been many, many complimentary and warm responses that we've received and memories shared. But Leila, I don't know if you want to go out and address that question about the museum.
Yes, for sure. In regards to his notes and his letters, they are already on display along other few artworks in connection to Seeroo الأرض, on display in the same building of Seeroo الأرض. So if you want to come and see the work, you will enjoy later on a small exhibition telling the story of the artist's journey for Seeroo الأرض, so they can basically learn more about the background of the artwork and how the artist created it. All the sketches, everything is on display there. And yes, the collection will be hopefully open to the public soon. We already included them in the Mathaf exhibition. Ranjit, you know it very well, this collection. It was in 2019 on show in Mathaf, and we are hoping to have them all on display in the museum that in the future will be open to the public. About Maqbool Fida Husain, I have to say this collection of this museum is coming from the generosity of the artist who donated his work to Qatar Foundation to make it accessible to the public in one place. So hopefully the museum will be next to Seeroo الأرض, where the people can come and be introduced to the artist's journey all the way until his latest artwork, Seeroo الأرض.
Thanks so much. Krish, this is a question for you, moving from the thoughts about the museum to come, which Leila just talked about, to the question of what artistic practice needs to engage with. Kishan Bagri has a question for you. Do you believe that art and religion have to go hand in hand together in the contemporary art world? Do you want to touch on it? It's a complex and sensitive subject, but do you want to talk a little bit, maybe from your own experience, art and religion?
You know, I worked on, I believe that, you know, this is religion. When we talk about religion, it is religion of God, or, you know, all of them are one kind of obsessive subject, you know, obsessive nature, obsessive nature. It doesn't go hand in hand, you know. It is like, it is, you know, like, it's not only God, you know. I think in everything else is also matter when it comes to a creative person. Your surrounding, your social situation, your political background, where you're working, all these things, the location you're based and where you originated, everything matters, you know. Religion is one of the things. I think, you know, it's one of the most dangerous obsession, you know, that much I can say. Yeah.
And there's a question that is, it does not seem to have a name. So we'll say anonymous attendee, and it's not it's directed to any of us apparently, but I'm going to pick you, Dimitri, to answer it. It says, identity, home, and displacement are key themes in the artist's work. How did the artist engage with Qatar? How did the influence of his time in Qatar reflect in his work? So I would take the liberty of parsing that for you in the following way. Given that you just had 10 minutes, how did you manage the balance of the different periods, phases of his life? Because the Qatar phase, although the last, was an incredible inspiration for him. So could you talk about how you embodied this in your research and the film eventually?
Absolutely. So we knew that at the end of the film, we would have Seeroo الأرض, right? And we knew that Qatar his presence in Qatar is an integral part of why this work is so important and all the inspiration he got from the country. But I guess the main thing that we tried to create with the documentary was, having researched Hussein, we went to see the artwork, and obviously it moved us, obviously it spoke to us, obviously it made sense to us. But to those who are not necessarily familiar with this work, maybe, you know, a few things here and there will be missing. It'll still be a very enjoyable experience because the show is just great. But the nuances of the different themes that he tackled and studied his whole life might have been missed. So I tried to find the periods of his life that are most relevant to the final, his final artwork, and trying to just give a bit of context to the audience so that when that time comes, that they're ready to experience that exhibition and that installation, they have all the stories and they have this picture, this feeling of what this artist was like, so that, you know, they can make the connection between the two.
Thanks so much, Dimitri. And I think that, you know, I mean, we have dozens of questions. I mean, people have really been very, very generous in the way they've embraced this evening. We've had wonderful responses, as you will all see from the Q&A. But I'm afraid it's that part of the evening where I have to remember that I'm some kind of time bureaucrat as well. So I want to thank everyone who's posted a question. I want to thank everyone who's engaged with us. And wherever you're watching this from, I do hope that you'll come away from this event tonight enchanted, fascinated, intrigued by the life and work of Maqbool Fida Husain, an artist who was born in our country, but who ended his days elsewhere, and meanwhile, really blessed many parts of this planet with his presence. And I do hope that many, many of us will have the chance to actually physically experience Seeroo fi al-Ardh, and to be able to render homage to this visionary artist of our times. So in conclusion, I want to thank the Qatar Foundation. I want to thank Scail magazine, whose partnership with QF has made this event possible. Krish, Leila, Dimitri, I want to thank all of you for having engaged in such a full-bodied and full-hearted manner with the questions today. And in the end, I want to thank the audience, which has joined us from everywhere, literally. Thank you very much. And if you want to know more about the installation, please go to the link of the landing page, which is on the website of Qatar Foundation. Be safe, be well, and good night. Thank you again.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was lovely discussion. Thank you.
Super. See you all again.